this lecture on Karl Marx, German philosopher, economist and sociologist. In this lecture, we will be looking at Karl Marx's contribution to Law of Dialectics and materialistic interpretation of history. Dialectics refers to a discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject but wishing to establish the truth through reasonable arguments. Marx rejected the idealistic view of Hegel. For him, the material reality of nature existed before the emergence of man. For Marx, the matter has given rise to organism, human species, consciousness and creative activities of the mind. For Marx, the ideas of human mind such as beauty, truth, justice, etc. were reflections of the material reality of nature and society. Marx says that the ideas and knowledge are results of man's struggle with material nature. In Marx's view, the material conditions of historical change were beyond the control of man until the emergence of modern science and industrial technology. Features of dialectical materialism. Scientific knowledge. One of the most important arguments of Marxian philosophy is that scientific knowledge is the knowledge of reality. This knowledge can be experienced as against the speculative arguments. Through scientific knowledge, one reality can be known adequately. Karl Marx presented a directly opposite explanation to the Hegelian ideal of dialectical materialism. Hegel, in his theory of dialectical idealism, argued that the real world is only the external form of an idea. This approach was overturned by Marx in his theory of dialectical materialism, in which he argued that the idea is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind. For Marx, reality was not only material reality, and for him, life and mind are its reflections. So, for Marx, matter precedes the mind and also determines the nature and changing contents of the mind. So, mind is always secondary and dependent on matter. So, Marx, it's the social being that determines their consciousness. Contrary to metaphysics, dialectics does not regard nature as an accidental agglomeration of things, but a mutually connected and integrated whole. Dialectical materialism regarded the events of the world as mutually interdependent and vast continuous process. Therefore, the developmental process is a product of quantitative improvement resulting in qualitative changes. Dialectical materialism describes nature as a continuous process of change. Marx was influenced by the 19th century evolutionary perspective. According to Marx, evolutionary change happens in the means of production and distribution. Dialectics considers existing social reality as thesis against which a new perspective arises, which is known as antithesis. The efforts to discover the truth may either justify the thesis or antithesis, or it may produce a new explanation which can be termed as synthesis. Materialistic interpretation of history or historical materialism. Marx's approach to the study of history of human civilization is known as historical materialism. His main argument was that the man is part of nature and human society is the outcome of material activity of man in nature. For him, what distinguishes man from animals is man's ability to produce subsistence. Thus, he emphasized on mode of production to understand the history. Accordingly, he identified 5 stages in the history, namely primitive communism. In this society, there was no private ownership of property and everything was done on communal basis. Ancient society was a period where 2 classes emerged. They were masters and slaves. In this stage, slaves were exploited by the masters. Then came the stage of feudalism. In this stage, kings and lords dominated over life and the serfs using religious sanctions. Modern capitalism came after feudalism, and in this stage, new forces of production resulted in new forms of exploitation. In his stage, the capitalists exploited the laborers. Finally, the communist society. With the revolution and emergence of classless society, where there is no exploitation and society will be based on communist principles of social ownership of means of production. Marx's analysis of historical materialism. For Marx, the primary objective of reality is the material conditions of life. For his survival, man is dependent on the resources of nature. Therefore, material means of subsistence give rise to the economic system, and on this foundation, all state institutions and laws develop. Economic relations are an important aspect of historical materialism for Marx. According to him, man's practical relations with the material world are man's economic relations. Marx treated the term material and economic as same. He says that economic structures is the real foundation on which rises the legal and political superstructure. Any change in material conditions also implies corresponding changes in social relations. In producing their material environment, men develop means of production. So at any given period in a society, there are definite ways in which men are related to each other. This relation is known as division of labor. This gives rise to class relations, and Marx's classes were part of the economic foundation of society. The productive forces of society are reflected in the superstructure of institutions. Institutions are built upon the fundamental property relations, which is reflected in the interests of the social classes. The mode of production in material life determines the social, political, and intellectual life processes. Marx sees state as a superstructure. The state reflects the interests, ideology, values, and power of the ruling class. It is the organized power of one class for oppressing another. The state thus becomes the political organ serving class domination. Marx saw historical change as a driving force behind social change. It is an important concept in the theory of historical materialism, according to which the conflict between social classes results in social change. Conflict is evident in each stage of economic production, from primitive communism to modern capitalism. Marx described the social system as a functionally interdependent set of parts. They are subject to historical conditions in which they are born. So the personality of the individual is the product of the consequences of existing productive forces in the given historical condition. Thank you.